"Mama, you're lucky we're even helping you. Sign it, or you can figure it out alone." My son said it like he was talking about a broken appliance, something inconvenient, something he didn't ask for. The ceiling fan above us clicked on its loose setting, and the air in my living room smelled like lemon polish and the faint sweetness of overripe peaches. I remember staring at his hand, the way his knuckles went pale around a pen, and thinking, when did my child start holding things over my head like a bill collector? I signed nothing that day, but the sentence stayed with me like smoke in my hair. That line is where my story begins, but it isn't where the consequences ended. It ended with a courthouse hallway that smelled like old paper and floor wax, with strangers reading my name on a docket like it was gossip. It ended with my son's wife whispering, "She's confused," while a clerk looked at me with polite pity. And it ended quietly, beautifully, with my attorney sliding a document across his desk and saying, "Mrs. Carver, there's a deed they didn't know existed, a hidden deed. The kind that turns the whole world right side up, even if it takes a while for your heart to believe it." I live in Texas in a small place outside New Braunfels where the wind carries cedar and dust, and summer heat presses down like a warm hand you can't shake off. My house sits back from the road, a one-story limestone place my husband Roy and I worked for until our backs and hands knew the shape of every sacrifice. The porch has a swing that groans when you sit, and the live oak out front drops leaves like it's always letting something go. The cicadas sing in the evening so loud you have to pause mid-sentence to hear yourself, and for 30 years that sound meant home. Roy died 12 years ago, and grief did what it always does. It rearranged the furniture inside my chest. Some days I could still smell his aftershave on the flannel shirts I kept too long in the closet. Some mornings I'd wake up reaching across the bed, half asleep, and touch cool sheets instead of a warm shoulder. I kept going because I had to. I kept going because that's what women like me do, quietly, steadily, even when the world thins out around us. When Roy and I were young, we didn't have much besides grit and a strong belief that you paid your bills and you didn't borrow trouble. I worked as a nurse's aide at a retirement home in San Antonio, on my feet for 12-hour shifts, smiling at folks who forgot their own names and still deserved dignity. Roy worked construction until his knees began to go, and even then he found ways to keep busy. We raised our son Travis in a house that sometimes had more love than money. I packed his lunches in brown paper sacks and wrote little notes on napkins when I could afford the ink. I learned early that money isn't just numbers, it's safety, it's choices, it's whether you can sleep through the night without counting worst-case scenarios. So I kept a small notebook. Nothing fancy, just lined paper and a stiff blue cover, and I wrote down what mattered: groceries, gas, prescription copays. Roy used to tease me about it, tapping the notebook and saying, "Evie, you think the bank's gonna run out?" And I'd smile and tell him, "No, but life runs out of patience." That notebook became a habit, and later it became a shield. The other thing I kept close was my keys. A simple ring with a brass house key, a mailbox key, and the tiny silver key to the cedar chest Roy made with his own hands. The ring was heavy from use, worn smooth in the places my fingers touched it most. I had a rhythm, keys in my purse on the hook by the door, hook in the same place every day. A small order in a world that can change on you overnight. You'll hear about those keys again because they became the measure of who thought they owned my life. Travis was an easy baby and a difficult grown man, and I say that with the kind of honesty that comes only after years of trying to excuse what you can't fix. As a boy, he loved to ride in Roy's truck and watch the cows in the fields as if they were part of a secret language. As a teenager, he had a streak of entitlement that I mistook for confidence. He'd borrow things and forget to return them. He'd ask for money with a grin and then sulk when the answer was no. I told myself it was youth, that he'd outgrow it like he outgrew his skinny jeans and loud music. The first red flag I ignored came when he was 23 and he moved back home for a month. A month turned into a year. He'd leave his laundry in piles like I ran a hotel. He'd eat what I cooked and complain that it wasn't real food like his friends ate, meaning fast food and whatever came in a box. One evening, I asked him to chip in for the electricity, and he laughed and said, "Mom, you're old school. Nobody pays their mom rent." Roy sat at the table and looked at him with a calm that was sharper than yelling. Later, Roy said to me, "We can love him without enabling him." and I nodded as if I understood how to do that. The second red flag came after Roy's funeral. Travis stood beside me in the church fellowship hall, people bringing casseroles and sweet tea, and he leaned close and whispered, "So the house is paid off, right?" I remember the way my stomach tightened, the way grief and suspicion can sit in the same place. I told him, "This isn't the time," and he shrugged like I'd insulted him. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind tap the window screen and thought, a son shouldn't sound like an investor at his father's funeral. The third red flag arrived with a woman named Kendra. She was pretty in a sharp, polished way, like she'd been taught that softness was weakness. She wore expensive perfume that clung to the air after she left the room. When she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. She called me Miss Evelyn at first, and then one day she switched to Evelyn, like we were equals in a competition I didn't know we were playing. Travis acted different around her, tighter, like his pride was on a leash. For a while, I tried. I invited them for Sunday dinner. I sent home leftovers in mismatched containers. I asked about their work, their plans, the kind of questions mothers ask, because silence feels like failure. Kendra would answer with vague, shiny words. Opportunities, investments, growth. Travis would nod along and I'd watch him become a stranger in his own skin. The first time they mentioned changing the deed, it was disguised as concern. We were sitting on my porch, the air thick and hot, the oak leaves barely moving. Kendra sipped iced tea and said, "Evelyn, what if something happens? What if you fall? What if you need help?" Travis reached over and squeezed my hand in a performance of tenderness. He said, "We just want to make sure everything's protected, so it doesn't get tied up." And I remember thinking, protected from what exactly? Because the only danger I felt was sitting right in front of me with polite smiles. They brought papers the next week. Not one paper, not two, an entire stack, clipped and tabbed like a school project. Travis said it was just a formality, and Kendra said it was standard. I asked to read them, and Travis sighed loudly like a child forced to do chores. Kendra tapped one page with her manicured nail and said, "It's basically just putting us on the deed so we can help you. You keep living here. Nothing changes." The ceiling fan in the living room clicked, and I could hear the refrigerator hum, steady and indifferent. I told them I needed time. Kendra's smile tightened. Travis's face darkened like a storm rolling in. He said, "Mom, you're making this harder than it has to be." I said quietly, "Roy and I paid for this house. I don't sign things I don't understand." And that's when he leaned forward and delivered the line I'll never forget. "Mama, you're lucky we're even helping you. Sign it, or you can figure it out alone." I didn't cry in front of them. I waited until the door closed behind them, until their car backed out of my driveway and the sound of it faded down the road. Then I sat in my kitchen, hands folded around my keyring like it could anchor me. The metal was cool against my palm. How did I raise someone who could threaten me with abandonment like it was a tool? That night, I put the papers in my cedar chest and locked it, like the lock could keep my life from being rewritten. But fear is a patient thing, and loneliness is persuasive. Weeks passed. My knees ached more than usual. I slipped once in the bathroom and caught myself on the sink, heart thudding like a fist. I told no one, but the thought stayed with me. What if I fall and no one knows? Travis called less. When he did, he sounded busy, irritated, like my existence was an interruption. Kendra started coming by alone. She'd bring little gifts, candles, bath salts, a throw blanket that smelled like fabric store shelves. She'd sit at my table and talk about safety and planning. She'd say, "Evelyn, you don't want the state deciding things, do you?" She'd mention nursing homes in passing, like casual threats wrapped in concern. And each time she left, the house felt bigger, emptier, as if the walls were listening. One afternoon, she picked up my key ring from the counter and turned it in her fingers. "Such old keys," she said lightly. "You should really get copies made, in case of emergencies." I reached for them and said, "Those stay with me." She laughed, a soft little sound. "Of course, I just worry." She didn't worry about me, not really. She worried about access. At the end of Act 1, I want you to understand this. I wasn't foolish. I was human. I was grieving, aging, and living in a world that treats older women like paperwork instead of people. I still had pride, but pride doesn't fix a broken hip or a blown water heater. And when Travis showed up 2 weeks later, looking unusually gentle, holding groceries like an offering, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe my son could be my son again. He hugged me longer than usual and whispered, "Let us help you, Mom, please." Then he placed the pen in my hand and slid the papers across the table. My keys sat beside my purse, glinting in the afternoon light, and for the first time, they didn't feel like mine. I told myself I was choosing family over fear. I didn't see the trap closing. I signed. I signed the papers without knowing my home had just been placed in someone else's name. The first change came so small, I almost convinced myself it was nothing. My property tax bill didn't arrive in the mail the way it always had. The mailbox felt lighter for days, and when I finally asked Travis if he'd seen anything, he said, "Oh yeah, we're helping you with that stuff now." His voice had that breezy certainty, like he'd already decided. I stood in my kitchen holding my keys, the metal biting into my fingers, and thought, since when does help mean I don't get to see my own mail? A week later, I noticed my porch swing had been moved. Not far, just a few inches, but enough that the chain creaked differently when I sat down. The wind had that late summer Texas bite, dry and dusty, and the smell of cut grass hung in the air from a neighbor's mower. I asked Kendra about it when she stopped by, and she said, "Oh, Travis wanted to fix the porch. We're making improvements, like my home was a project under new management." The first betrayal incident was the lock. I came back from HEB one afternoon, my reusable bags cutting into my wrists, sweat damp under my blouse. I stepped onto my porch, reached for my key, and it wouldn't turn. I jiggled it, tried again, my heart starting to climb into my throat. Then the door opened from the inside, and Travis stood there holding a new set of keys. "We changed the locks," he said like he was telling me the weather. "It's safer." I stared at him, grocery bags still hanging from my arms. "You changed my locks," I said slowly. My voice sounded calm, but inside I felt something crack. Travis handed me a new key and said, "Don't make it a thing, Mom." Kendra appeared behind him, arms crossed, and added, "It's for your own good." My own good, I thought, has started to sound like their convenience. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out my little blue notebook. I wrote, "Locks changed without asking." My handwriting looked shaky, and that made me angry at my own body for betraying me in small ways. The lamp above the table buzzed faintly, and the house smelled like onions from the stew I'd made, even though I'd lost my appetite. I held my keys in my palm and felt the difference. New key, unfamiliar teeth, a new key to my own home. The second betrayal incident came with the bills. My electricity shut off on a Monday morning, right when the Texas heat decided to show off. The air conditioner stopped with a dying sigh, and silence flooded the house. Within an hour, the rooms became ovens, the air thick and stale. I called the utility company, sweating, and the woman on the phone said, "Ma'am, the account is past due." I told her I'd mailed the check weeks ago. She paused and said, "The billing address was changed last month." I felt my stomach drop. "Changed to where?" I asked. She read an address, Travis and Kendra's address. My ears rang, and for a moment I could only hear the hum of my own blood. They moved my bills to their house. When I called Travis, he sounded annoyed. "I told you, Mom, we're handling it. It's a mix-up." "It's not a mix-up," I said. "My power is off." He sighed. "You're getting worked up over nothing. We'll pay it." Kendra got on the line and said, sweet as syrup, "Evelyn, you have to stop stressing. It's not good for your health." So now my worry is a medical problem, I thought, not their behavior. The third betrayal incident was the repairman. My water heater began to leak, puddling rusty water in the garage. I called a local plumber I'd used before, a man named Hector who always explained things without talking down to me. He came out, crouched by the heater, and said, "Mrs. Carver, it's old. We can replace it." I told him to go ahead. He looked uncomfortable and said, I already spoke to Travis. He said he'll decide." I turned to Hector and felt my cheeks burn. "You spoke to my son about my water heater?" I asked. Hector scratched his neck and said, "He told me he's the homeowner now. Said I needed his approval." The words hit me like cold water in the heat. Homeowner now. I watched my garage light flicker, heard a distant dog bark, and realized I was standing in my own space being treated like a guest. That evening, I confronted Travis in my living room. The ceiling fan clicked, the same loose rhythm as before. Like a reminder, I held my keyring up and said, "Why did you tell a plumber you're the homeowner?" Travis didn't even blink. He said, "Because on paper I am." Kendra sat on my couch like she belonged there and added, "It's simpler this way. You wanted help, remember?" My mouth went dry. "On paper," I repeated. Travis leaned back and said, "Don't get dramatic, Mom." He said it like I was an actress begging for attention. I felt my hands tremble and I hated that he could see it. He's using my age like a weapon, I thought. He's counting on me to doubt myself. The gaslighting started after that, like a steady drip that wears down stone. When I asked about mail, Travis said, "You lose things." When I asked about bills, Kendra said, "You forget." When I asked why my bank account balance looked wrong, Travis laughed and said, "Mom, you're not great with numbers." I'd spent decades balancing budgets on a nurse's aide salary, stretching pennies until they screamed. Hearing him rewrite my competence made something in me go very still. Then came the major breaking point. I went to buy groceries and my card declined. I tried again, cheeks hot under the fluorescent lights, the cashier pretending not to notice. The machine beeped in that sharp, humiliating way, and a line formed behind me. I fumbled for cash, hands clumsy, and paid with crumpled bills from the bottom of my purse. When I got to my car, I sat in the heat and cried quietly, the steering wheel burning my palms. Did my own child really do this to me? That thought wasn't dramatic. It was plain, like a fact written on a form. I drove straight to the bank, the air conditioner barely keeping up, my blouse sticking to my back. Inside, the bank smelled like carpet cleaner and cold air. I stood at the counter and asked for my balance. The teller's eyes flicked to her screen, then back to me with a practiced gentleness. "Mrs. Carver," she said softly, "there have been a lot of withdrawals." She printed a mini statement and slid it to me. The paper felt thin, almost too fragile to carry the weight of what it said. Cash withdrawals, transfers, fees, overdrafts. My hands started to shake, and I gripped my keys so hard the edges left marks. I went home and sat at my kitchen table with my blue notebook and that little slip of paper. The house smelled like warm dust and old wood, and the afternoon light made everything look tired. I wrote down the numbers. I wrote down the dates. I tried to make sense of it. Then I called Travis and asked, "Why is my account being drained?" He didn't pause. He said, "What are you talking about?" I read him the dates. Kendra's voice cut in from the background, sharp and impatient. "Evelyn, you need to stop accusing us. This is why we wanted to handle things." Travis said, "Mom, you're spiraling. Maybe you should see a doctor." And that's when I understood. This wasn't confusion. This was strategy. A notice arrived taped to my door 2 days later. A plain sheet of paper and a plastic sleeve fluttering in the hot wind. "Notice to vacate," it said. 3 days. I read it twice, then a third time, because my brain refused to accept it. My own porch smelled like sun-baked wood and betrayal. My hands were steady when I peeled it off the door, but inside, something was screaming. I sat on my porch swing and listened to the cicadas, loud and indifferent. My keys sat in my lap, heavy and familiar, and for the first time I realized the symbolism wasn't sentimental, it was literal. They are trying to take my home. Travis called that evening and said, "Mom, we don't want drama. Just go stay somewhere else for a bit. You'll be more comfortable." I asked, "Somewhere else like where?" He said, "We'll figure it out." That's what people say when they don't plan to. I didn't sleep. I walked through my house and touched the walls, the door frames Roy had painted, the place where his height marks still lived in pencil near the pantry. I stood by the cedar chest and ran my fingers over the carved lid. My throat felt tight, but my mind was strangely clear. If they can do this once, they can do it again. And if I stay quiet, I'll disappear inside their story. By morning, humiliation had shifted into something colder. Not rage, not hysteria. A quiet resolve that felt like stepping onto solid ground. I opened my blue notebook and wrote a new line. No more permission. Then I wrote, "Document everything." I didn't know yet how deep the betrayal went, but I knew I would not be evicted from a life I built. I picked up the phone and called the bank again, this time asking for printed statements, not answers. And when I hung up, my hand didn't shake. My keys glinted in the light like a promise. If they wanted paperwork, I would give them paperwork. I decided to quietly gather evidence, but I had no idea what I would find in the records. The first habit I broke was small, but it felt like ripping a stitch. For years, I'd left my mail on the kitchen counter, trusting that whatever arrived belonged to me by default. Now I bought a locking mail slot insert and spoke to the post office about holding anything that looked like legal documents. The clerk, a woman with kind eyes and a heavy Texas accent, said, "Honey, you'd be surprised what folks try." I nodded and thought, no, I wouldn't. I also stopped answering Travis's calls immediately. That might sound petty, but it was a ritual disruption all the same. My whole life, I'd responded to family like an alarm. Drop everything, fix it, smooth it over. Now I let the phone ring while I washed a dish, while I wrote in my notebook, while I breathed through the urge to keep peace at my own expense. Peace isn't peace when it's built on your silence. My support came from an unexpected place, my neighbor, Mrs. Darlene Pruitt. Darlene was a widow too, a retired librarian with silver hair and a backbone made of steel. She'd lived next door for 15 years and knew every creak in my porch and every gossip ripple in our small community. When she saw the notice taped to my door, she didn't gasp or dramatize. She said, "Evie, that's not right," and the simplicity of her certainty made me feel less alone. "Come sit," she told me, and we sat at her kitchen table where it smelled like coffee and cinnamon. I showed her the notice, the bank slip, the dates in my notebook. She read everything slowly, then looked up and said, "They're counting on you being ashamed. Don't be." My eyes burned and I swallowed hard. I had been ashamed, not because I did wrong, but because I'd been taught that family trouble is something you hide like dirty laundry. Darlene knew a local attorney, an older man named Calvin Rhodes, who'd helped her sister with an estate mess. She called him right there, speakerphone on, and said, "Calvin, I've got a friend who needs you." I listened to the phone ring and felt my heart thump, not with panic this time, but with the fear that comes before reclaiming power. Calvin's voice came on, warm and steady. He said, "Tell me what's happening." I met Calvin Rhodes 2 days later in his office in Seguin, in a building that smelled like paper and old leather. He wore a simple suit and had the kind of face that didn't rush. His receptionist offered me water, and the cup was cold in my hands, grounding. I sat across from him and placed my keyring on the desk without thinking, like proof I existed. Calvin noticed it and said, "Those keys look like they've opened a lot of doors." I replied, "They opened my life." Calvin asked for specifics, and I gave them dates, words, behaviors. He didn't interrupt when I said Travis accused me of confusion. He didn't smirk when I described Kendra's sweetness as a blade. He simply nodded and said, "We need documents." He slid a manila folder across the desk toward me. "This folder," he said, "is where we put the truth." That folder became my spine. I filled it with bank statements, printed and highlighted. I wrote notes on sticky tabs, ATM withdrawal, transfer, fee. I took screenshots of texts where Travis said things like, "Stop overreacting," and Kendra said, "We're doing what's best." I even recorded one phone call, legal in Texas with one-party consent, where Travis admitted, "On paper, it's ours." When I listened back, his voice sounded colder than I remembered. Calvin also sent me to the county clerk's office to pull property records. Walking into that building felt like walking into a place that held my history in filing cabinets. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of toner. A clerk with reading glasses asked for the address, typed it in, and printed pages. I watched the printer spit out my life in black and white, and there it was, my home listed under Travis and Kendra's names. My stomach clenched, but my hands stayed steady as I gathered the papers. Okay, I thought, so it's real. They did it. I drove home with the documents on the passenger seat like a fragile passenger. The Texas sky was wide and bright, and the sun turned the road into a ribbon of heat. I kept thinking about Roy's hands, about how he built this place, and how paperwork was now being used to erase him. That evening, Darlene sat with me while I made copies. The copier whirred on my dining table like a small engine of justice. My house smelled like paper and faint lemon cleaner, and the sound of pages sliding felt like progress. I placed my keys beside the folder each time, the ring clinking softly like punctuation. Darlene said, "You're doing good, Evie." I said, "I'm just doing what I should have done sooner." Calvin called me the next morning with a new tone in his voice, more focused, sharper. He said, "Mrs. Carver, I want you to come in today." My heart jumped. "Did you find something?" I asked. There was a pause, and then he said, "I found inconsistencies, and I want to meet before we confront them." The word confront landed like a stone. I looked at my keys, then at the cedar chest, and felt the house hold its breath with me. We set a date and a place, the title company office in New Braunfels, where the deed change had supposedly been processed. Calvin said, "We'll request the closing file, we'll ask for the notary log, and we'll do it with witnesses." Darlene offered to come with me, and I said yes, because I was done walking into storms alone. The night before the meeting, I laid out my folder, my notebook, and my keys on the table like a ritual. This is not revenge, I told myself. This is retrieval. When I went to bed, I didn't sleep much, but I wasn't trembling. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the fan click, the same familiar sound that had heard Travis threaten me months ago. I thought about how people underestimate older women. They confuse our softness with weakness. They forget we've survived things they haven't even imagined yet. And as dawn crept in, pale and steady, I realized my fear had changed shape. The next morning, I walked out of my house, locked the door, and held my keys like they were a vow. The folder sat tucked under my arm, heavy with truth. My heart was steady as I stepped into the heat. Travis and Kendra thought I would fold. They thought I'd be embarrassed into compliance. They didn't know I was walking toward them with paperwork, witnesses, and a lawyer who believed me. The confrontation was set inside the very office where my home had been signed away. The title company office was too bright, too clean, and it smelled like vanilla air freshener trying to hide something sharper underneath. The waiting room had glossy brochures about dream homes and smooth closings, as if property was just a cheerful transaction. Darlene sat beside me, hands folded, eyes alert. Calvin stood with us, calm as a fence post, and when the receptionist asked how she could help, he said, "We're here to review the closing file for 214 Ridge Oak Lane." Hearing my address out loud in that place made my throat tighten. Travis and Kendra arrived 10 minutes late, like they wanted to remind everyone whose time mattered. Travis wore a button-down shirt that didn't quite hide his impatience. Kendra wore heels that clicked on the tile like little gavel taps. When she saw Calvin, her expression flickered, just a moment, but enough. "What's this?" she asked, voice sweet. I said, "This is me taking my life back." We were taken into a small conference room with a glass wall. The hum of the building's air conditioning filled the space, and somewhere down the hall a phone rang and rang. A manager named Mr. Ellis joined us, along with a younger woman who carried a file box and looked nervous. Calvin introduced himself and explained politely that there were concerns about how the deed had been executed. Travis scoffed. "It was all legal," he said. Mom agreed. Calvin's voice stayed even. "Then you won't mind if we review the file," he said. Mr. Ellis nodded, though his eyes darted toward the box. Kendra smiled too brightly and said, "This is ridiculous. Evelyn gets confused. She forgets what she signs." The words hit me, but I kept my face calm. That's the story they chose, I thought. And now they have to live with it. Mr. Ellis opened the file and slid documents across the table. There was a copy of the deed, stamped and recorded. There was a notary acknowledgement. There were signature pages. Calvin leaned forward, reading carefully, and I watched his eyes narrow. He asked, "Who was the notary?" The younger woman said, "It looks like it was processed through a mobile notary service." Calvin asked for the notary's name and commission number. She provided it, voice small. Calvin asked, "Do you have the notary log?" Mr. Ellis hesitated. "We don't always keep those on site," he said. Calvin didn't blink. "Then I'd like the contact information for the notary, and I'd like a copy of the identification used." Kendra shifted in her chair, and Travis's jaw tightened. I felt my keys in my purse, pressing against the fabric like a reminder, "Stay steady." Travis tried to take control, raising his voice slightly. "Look, Mom wanted us to help. She can't handle the house anymore. The repairs, the taxes." He gestured like he was listing burdens. Kendra added, "We've been paying for things. We've been responsible." I looked at them and said quietly, "You changed my locks. You redirected my bills. You drained my bank account. Travis laughed once, sharp. Prove it, he said. So I did. I opened my manila folder and slid out the bank statements Calvin had helped me organize. I placed them on the table with my old blue notebook on top, my handwriting visible. Darlene watched like a witness in church, solemn and present. I said, "These withdrawals happened the same days you told me you were handling things." I pointed to dates and amounts, $400 cash, $500 cash, over and over. "That's not handling," I said. "That's stealing." Kendra's smile faltered. Travis leaned in and said, "That's not what happened." Calvin turned his laptop toward Mr. Ellis and the younger woman. "We also have a recording," he said, "where Travis states the property is on paper, theirs." Travis's face changed, like the blood drained out and left him blinking. He said, "You recorded me?" I replied, "You taught me to stop trusting words." The manager's expression shifted from polite to concerned. Mr. Ellis cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carver, we take fraud allegations seriously." Kendra snapped, "This isn't fraud, she's just—" Calvin cut in smoothly. "Let's talk about the notary," he said, "because the signature on this deed doesn't match Mrs. Carver's signature on her bank records." He placed 2 pages side by side. Even to my untrained eye, the deed signature looked rushed, slanted, wrong. My real signature had loops, care. This one looked like someone mimicking a memory. Travis's voice rose. "Mom signed it. She just doesn't remember." He turned to me, eyes hard. "Tell them you signed it." The room went quiet, the hum of the air conditioner suddenly loud. I looked at my son and felt grief like an ache behind my ribs, but I didn't look away. "I remember you putting a pen in my hand," I said. "I remember you saying I'd be alone if I didn't comply. That's not consent, that's coercion." Kendra leaned forward, eyes flashing. "You're ruining our lives," she hissed. That sentence, in that office full of paperwork and witnesses, was the moment her mask slipped completely. Mr. Ellis blinked like he just realized this wasn't a normal family dispute. Darlene said, calmly, "They ruined her life first." Travis's face reddened, and for a moment he looked like a boy again, cornered, angry, desperate. Then Calvin said the words that changed everything. "Mr. Ellis," he said, "we also requested the county's full chain of title, and we found something your file doesn't mention." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document in a protective sleeve. "This," he said, "is a deed executed years ago that establishes Mrs. Carver's sole ownership and restricts unauthorized transfers." He looked at me briefly, then back to them. "It was never provided during this transaction." Kendra frowned. Travis scoffed. "What are you talking about?" Travis demanded. Calvin slid the document across the table. The paper looked older, edges slightly yellowed, but the stamp was clear. The signatures were clear. The language was clear. Calvin said, "This is a recorded deed from 1998, a special warranty deed from Roy Carver, transferring his interest solely to Evelyn Carver after a refinance. It includes a corrective provision tied to the prior lien release." He tapped a line. "And here is a clause indicating any later transfer requires Evelyn's acknowledged signature under strict notarial verification." My mouth went dry. I stared at Roy's name on the page, his signature steady and familiar, like seeing his handwriting again on an old card. I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness exactly, but from the strange relief of being remembered by the law. Roy protected me, I thought, even from the grave. Calvin continued. "This deed was recorded, but it was indexed under a variation of the address due to a clerical error, Ridge Oaks instead of Ridge Oak. It's been sitting there, hidden in plain sight." The younger woman's eyes widened. Mr. Ellis leaned in, reading more closely. "This changes the analysis," he murmured. Travis's face went pale. "That doesn't matter," he said quickly. "We already recorded ours." Calvin's voice sharpened just a notch. "It matters because it calls into question the validity of your deed, especially in light of signature discrepancies and coercion allegations." He looked at Mr. Ellis. "And it triggers your company's duty to investigate." That's when the discovery call happened, right there in the room. Mr. Ellis stepped out and returned with a speakerphone on the table. "I'm calling our legal department," he said. The phone rang once, twice, then a calm voice answered. Mr. Ellis summarized the situation. and the voice on the line asked for specific details: dates, notary name, identification copies. Calvin provided them. Then the voice said, "We need to freeze any further action on this property and initiate a fraud review." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Kendra stood up abruptly, chair scraping. "This is insane," she snapped. "Evelyn is doing this because she's bitter." I looked up at her and said softly, "No, Kendra. I'm doing this because you tried to erase me." Travis's hands shook slightly as he reached for the deed copy, like he could physically grab control. Calvin placed his hand over the document, calm, firm, and said, "Don't touch that." The room had witnesses now: title staff, a manager, my neighbor, my attorney, and the truth was no longer a private argument in my living room. Travis's eyes darted, searching for someone to rescue him from consequence. Kendra's face worked through anger, then calculation. She said, "Fine, we'll just have her declared incompetent." The cruelty of it was so casual, it made my stomach turn. Darlene gasped quietly, and Mr. Ellis's mouth fell open just a little. Calvin looked at Kendra and said, "Threatening guardianship as retaliation is not the leverage you think it is." He turned to me. "Mrs. Carver, do you want to proceed with a formal fraud report and an affidavit of coercion?" My heart pounded, but my voice stayed steady. "Yes," I said. "I do." I pulled my keys from my purse and set them on the table beside the folder, the metal ringing softly. It was a small sound, but it felt like a bell. Travis stared at those keys like they accused him. "Mom," he said, voice suddenly pleading, "we were just trying to help." His eyes looked wet, but I'd learned something important by then. Tears can be tools. I said, "Helping doesn't require changing my locks. Helping doesn't require draining my account. Helping doesn't require eviction." The words came out calm, like I was reading a list I'd prepared long ago. Travis's shoulders sagged, and Kendra's eyes flashed hatred. Mr. Ellis said, "We'll need statements," and the younger woman slid forms toward me. I signed them with my real signature, slow and deliberate, and felt something settle in my chest. Calvin requested the notary's commission verification and log, and Mr. Ellis agreed. The legal department on the phone said they would coordinate with authorities if fraud was confirmed. Travis looked trapped now, not by my anger, but by systems he hadn't expected me to use. The public confrontation didn't end in that room. It escalated. 2 weeks later, we were in the Guadalupe County Courthouse because Travis and Kendra had filed for eviction under their names. The hallway smelled like old books and anxiety. People sat on benches holding folders, eyes tired. When my case was called, I walked into the courtroom with Calvin beside me and Darlene sitting behind, her presence like a warm hand on my back. Travis and Kendra sat at the other table, dressed as if for church, faces carefully arranged. Kendra whispered to their attorney, who looked irritated. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes, reviewed documents with quiet efficiency. Calvin presented the evidence: the bank statements, the recording transcript, the signature comparison, the title company fraud review letter, and then, like the final nail, the hidden deed that corrected the chain of title. He explained the indexing error and how it had been discovered. The judge looked up at Travis and asked, "Do you have a response?" Travis cleared his throat. "My mother is confused," he said, repeating the lie like a prayer. The judge's gaze didn't soften. "Your mother appears coherent," she said, "and the documentation is substantial." Kendra's face tightened. This is what public vindication looks like, I thought. Not applause, not drama, just the truth being spoken by someone with authority. The judge ruled that the eviction was denied and referred the deed matter to the appropriate investigative channels. She also issued an order restricting Travis and Kendra from changing locks, interfering with mail, or accessing my accounts. The words felt like clean air entering my lungs. Travis's attorney leaned close to him, whispering urgently. Kendra's hands clenched on the table. I kept my eyes forward, steady, let them feel what I felt. I thought, the shock of losing control. As we left the courtroom, a few people who had overheard bits of the case looked at me differently. Not with pity, with respect. A clerk even said quietly, "Good for you, ma'am." Darlene squeezed my arm and whispered, "You did it." But Calvin's hand touched my elbow and he murmured, "Not yet. The investigation is next." And that's when I realized Act 4 wasn't over. Because consequences weren't just about keeping my house. They were about exposing how far Travis and Kendra had gone and what they'd done with the money. And Calvin had just received a call that morning about the notary log. He leaned in close as we stood in the courthouse hallway and said, "Mrs. Carver, the notary doesn't remember you, but she remembers Kendra." My blood turned cold. Calvin's eyes were steady as he continued. "And the log shows your name signed on a day you were documented as being at a medical appointment across town." The hallway noise blurred. My keys sat heavy in my purse, and for a moment I could barely breathe. If that was true, it meant the deed wasn't just coercion. It meant forgery. We had proof the deed's signature may have been forged, and the investigation was about to drop hard. The fallout didn't happen in one dramatic explosion. It happened in phone calls, letters, and quiet official steps that moved like gears turning. The title company formally voided their involvement in the transaction and cooperated with the investigation. Calvin filed an affidavit with the county to correct the property record, attaching the hidden deed and the judge's order. The bank opened a fraud claim tied to the withdrawals and transfers, and because we had patterns, dates, times, even ATM locations, things became less he said, she said, and more here is what happened. Travis tried to call me the day after the courthouse ruling. His name flashed on my phone, and for a moment my hand hovered, old instincts begging me to answer. Then I looked at my keys on the table and remembered how it felt to stand outside my own door, locked out. I let it ring. He left a voicemail, his voice thick with anger. "So you're really doing this," he said. "You're choosing strangers over your family." "No," I thought. "I'm choosing myself over your entitlement." That was the line I wrote in my notebook. I did not choose strangers. I chose truth. I'd spent years being the peacemaker, the one who smoothed everything. Now I was learning that sometimes peace is just surrender dressed in manners. Kendra made one last attempt to control the narrative. She told relatives that I was senile. She told people at church that I was being manipulated. She tried to turn my age into a stain, but the public record didn't care about her opinions. The judge's order was real. The corrected deed filing was real. And when the bank refunded a portion of the stolen funds after their investigation, it came with a letter stating unauthorized access had occurred. That letter was not emotional, it was factual, and it gave me something I didn't know I needed, a clean, official confirmation that I was not imagining anything. The legal consequences came next, and they came with quiet weight. Travis was required to enter a restitution agreement tied to the bank fraud findings, and while the case didn't turn into a sensational headline, it didn't stay private either. In a small town, word travels faster than weather. People who'd once nodded politely at Travis started looking away. A cousin who had believed Kendra's confusion story called me and said, voice trembling, "Aunt Evie, I'm sorry, I didn't know." I said, "Neither did I," until I did. Travis lost access to my accounts permanently. Calvin helped me set up new accounts, new passwords, and protections I didn't even know existed. We put a fraud alert on my credit. We arranged for my mail to be secured. We also updated my estate plan so no one could weaponize paperwork against me again. It felt strange sitting in that attorney's office signing documents after what I'd been through, but this time every signature felt like mine. My reputation changed, too. The whispers about me being forgetful didn't vanish overnight, but they softened when people saw me walking with purpose again. At church, an older woman I barely knew squeezed my hand and said, "You're brave." I didn't feel brave. I felt tired and relieved, but I also felt something else, visible, like I had stepped back into my own story. The emotional resolution was not a reunion. Travis did not come crawling back with sincerity. He came back with self-pity and anger, and I refused to drink from that cup. I wrote him one letter, short, plain, steady. I said I loved him because I am his mother, but I would not allow him access to my home, my money, or my dignity. I told him any future communication must go through Calvin. I mailed it with hands that did not shake. Some relatives stayed loyal to him, because it's easier to cling to the familiar villain than admit they misjudged the quiet woman. Some stayed silent, which hurt in a dull way, but a few more than I expected stood with me. Darlene, of course, a niece who started visiting on Saturdays, bringing kolaches and stories. Even Hector the plumber stopped by one day and said, "Mrs. Carver, if you need anything, you call me, not them." That simple statement felt like a nail hammered into the truth. I was not alone. I reclaimed my home in small rituals. I replaced the locks again, this time by my choice. The new keys felt familiar faster than I expected. I hung Roy's photo back in the hallway where Kendra had moved it, for better feng shui, as if my grief needed redecorating. I sat on my porch swing and listened to the cicadas and let the sound mean home again. And I put my blue notebook in the cedar chest beside the hidden deed copy, like a record of survival. The symbolic objects mattered because they reminded me what was real. The keys meant autonomy, the notebook meant truth, the folder meant evidence, and the old photo frame meant history, proof that my life existed before my son tried to rewrite it. Every time I touched those things, I remembered, I am not paperwork, I am a person. If you're listening and you've lived through something like this, children who become predators, partners who smile while they plan, please hear me. Shame is one of their favorite tools. They want you quiet because quiet is easy to exploit. You do not have to protect someone who is harming you just because you share blood. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity. And asking for help is not weakness, it is wisdom. I used to believe dignity meant enduring quietly. Now I know dignity also means speaking, documenting, and refusing to be erased. It means walking into a courthouse with your head up, even when your hands are trembling inside your purse around a set of keys. It means letting the truth be public when secrecy has been used against you. It means trusting your own memory, your own instincts, your own lived experience. The last time I saw Travis in person was outside the bank. He stood near the entrance, eyes hard, and said, "Was it worth it?" The Texas sun was bright, reflecting off car windshields, and the air smelled like hot asphalt. I looked at him and said, "It wasn't about winning. It was about living." He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but the words didn't come. I walked past him and felt the keys in my pocket, solid and familiar. I pushed open the bank door, and the cool air hit my face like a clean wave. Behind me, he stayed outside where he belonged, no longer holding my life like leverage. Inside, I greeted the teller by name, signed my own paperwork, and reclaimed the simple right of being the one in charge of my own account. It wasn't dramatic. It was sacred. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've lived through something similar, you're not alone. Would you like to hear more stories of women finding their justice?